Miami Hurricanes scored a big recruiting victory over the weekend. So who's next?
You are Locked On Canes, your daily podcast on the Miami Hurricanes, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Happy Monday, if there is such a thing. I am Alex Donno, University of Miami alumnus, longtime South Florida sports radio vet, writer for allhurricanes.com, and thank you so much to the everydayers for making Locked On Canes your first listen and your first watch today. We're available free wherever you get your podcasts. We're free on YouTube. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I am on location here in Charlotte, North Carolina. ACC Media Days are kicking off today. And today's episode, you guys know every time we bring on the recruiting overlord, he's brought to you by LinkedIn. These days, every new potential hire can feel like a high-stakes wager for your small business. That's why LinkedIn Jobs helps find the right people for your team faster and for free. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/LockedOnCollege. Terms and conditions apply. On this episode of Locked On Canes, we will talk about current Miami players saying they've shed the negativity, which was something that was holding them down, I think, the last couple of years. Hopefully they are free from that negativity this coming season. We're going to talk a lot of recruiting on this episode, including how Jaboree Antoine, the newest Miami Hurricanes commit, what kind of an impact he can have in Coral Gables. We'll also talk about who could be next now that Miami just got a big victory. So we welcome in the recruiting overlord of the Locked On Network, Brian Smith, who's also my colleague at allhurricanes.com. So, Brian, now that Miami's landed Antoine, we start to look at potentially another corner who could come aboard, Ben Hanks Jr., local from Miami Booker T. Washington. The only catch here is Ben Hanks Sr. played for the Florida Gators, so he's a local Miami kid, but a Florida Gators legacy. Where do you think Miami stands in Ben Hanks' recruitment?
I've had this conversation with you and other people. He's in a bit of a dilemma. Booker T is obviously a pipeline for a school like Miami, but everybody recruits him. I know Florida State would love to have him too. I've heard different things, but depends on the person. Like, I know Brandon Olson thinks that Florida feels good about him. He covers the Gators on all Gators. I haven't heard anything from my brethren to tell me that it's still not open. But I remember Ben playing. He is the consequential Gator, like was in the middle of their run. I have a hard time picking against Florida, but why hasn't he done it yet?
Right.
One of the things that I've looked at forever, when it's an obvious choice, if it's not done by the middle of summer, he's not definitely going there. There's something going on. I have a feeling this will drag out for quite a while.
Well, and talk about Ben Hanks Jr. as a player, because this is one of those guys that I constantly hear people say, he's a 4-star who could be a 5-star by the time they're done handing out stars this year.
He has the length that you're looking for. I think he could play corner or safety, depending on the scheme. And he's a hitter. He's a guy that'll come down and hit you. I'm curious how teams are pitching him. Somebody might be throwing nickel at him. Somebody might be throwing free safety, corner. It just depends. But I would recruit him as an athlete in the secondary, kind of like Picket in a way. I mean, DJ's his own entity, but the same principle. When you have versatile DBs, that means you can mix and match in your secondary, and kids like hearing anyway that you're going to be a valuable part of the entirety of a secondary. So that's how I would do it. And I've seen him play. He's just really, really aggressive, has those long arms that he can use for leverage. He's exactly what you're looking for, man.
Do we have any sense as to what Ben Hanks' timeline could be when he might announce?
I do not. I know that some people would love to know, myself included, but he's a South Florida kid. Their timeline is signing day for me until otherwise proven. Unless he announces something specific in the next 10 minutes, I always consider it signing day. Even if he commits, like the South Florida kids just beat to a different drum. So, again, though, my key here, why hasn't he just committed to Florida? That's where his dad wants him to go. Let's not kid ourselves. Yeah. I'm guessing that part of it, let's be honest, is Billy's on the hot seat. He probably wants to see the Florida-Miami game. Do you blame him? I was just writing about that on All Hurricanes. It's a very easy thing to discuss because, like, all these kids, I've even had this conversation with Olson, they have to at least consider that an issue. If you just want to go to Florida, that's cool. You go through the coaching change. But if he gets fired and you're attached to those coaches, man, so why even commit? That would be my guess.
So another player who I would say is a candidate, probably an even stronger candidate, to be honest, because he doesn't have that whole. Well, actually, he does have legacy ties of his own. But Iose Epenesa, Brian,
Right.
5-star edge rusher. Now he's got his own considerations because he has multiple family ties to Iowa. I've heard though recently it might be more of a Miami versus Utah battle for him. And there has been an RPM prediction by Gary Furman from Kane Sport logged for Epinesa to land at Miami. This is another one that I'm not clear on what his timeline might look like, Brian. And obviously, Miami fans are looking pretty closely at this one with Miami just having missed out on a 5-star player in DJ Picket. Epinesa, 5-star player who has been trending towards Miami. Do you agree with those trends?
I haven't heard anything different. I know I was just on the Iowa podcast and they were not feeling good about it, which surprised me. I was like, oh,
Wow.
I didn't even ask. I'm like, okay, well, yeah, there's a reason for that. So I have no connections with Utah, by the way, but that's an interesting pick for a kid from Illinois, by the way, is Utah. Miami has the advantage here, in my opinion. Bigger name program, Hall of Fame DN coach. And I know that their NIL package will be better than Utah's. So I like Miami as well.
And how much do you like Epinesa? Talk about his game a little bit.
Man, he is so fun to watch. Alex, he's up to 265, 270 from what I'm told. His hand use and his ability to get off blocks using technique is so much more advanced than most high school kids. And again, his brother plays for the Bills, for folks that don't know. I'm sure that kind of helps because he was a defensive lineman too. He was one of the best players in the Big Ten. He's going to be a long-time NFL player. He's able to pick his brain whenever. But then he kind of like a corner, as an edge rusher, he has the length you're looking for, and he's pretty strong too. He can one-arm stab somebody and go through him, or he can use hands and cut underneath. He is a weapon. And on 3rd down and 7, if you want to slide him inside now that he's gained some size, not many offensive guards are going to do well in a one-on-one.
I know another 5-star player that Miami is definitely making a serious push for in recruiting. I don't pretend to know what this young man is thinking, but I know Miami has had some success landing players from Mandarin High School in Jacksonville, having landed Hilton Drake Stubbs a couple of weeks ago, Derek Plaz from the previous cycle. So they've got 5-star wide receiver Jaime Ffrench there at Mandarin. And I don't know, but Brian, I keep hearing things about how hard Miami is going in for Ffrench. So maybe I have reason for some optimism here. But as you've covered throughout this process, Jaime seems to have a new favorite every couple of weeks, and there's a lot of programs in the mix for him.
Yeah, Jamie's a kid I've known since he was in 8th grade, and his list has changed several times. He's had some weird scenarios play out. Ohio State didn't do the greatest job of recruiting him, blah, blah, blah. Florida State, Miami have all been off after him. Texas is even recruiting him. He has a list across the country. And he told me the visits right before he took them would be the determining factor. Now I'm like, okay, it was face-to-face conversation, so I took it at straight up value, but he hasn't announced anything. So maybe he's going to take some more unofficials. I know Miami's all in on him and Dallas Wilson, among others. Obviously, Vernell Brown just announced for Florida. For those of you who didn't see, he committed yesterday. So he's off the board. But Miami's kind of like, we're going after the elite kids. If we don't get them, I think they're just going to use the portal if they need to add somebody after this. That's my opinion at this point, because there aren't very many other guys on the board. They're going for the kids that, unfortunately for Miami, are going to make very late decisions. It's boom or bust. But these are elite kids too. Dallas Wilson and Jaime Ffrench might be the 2 best receivers overall in the country. And they also both happen to be from the state of Florida. Got to recruit them. I'm curious to see if he takes an unofficial to UM early in the season, because I always say this: follow what they do, not what they say. And because he didn't make a decision right after the visits that he took this summer, he's still undecided. Jamie doesn't want guys like me bothering him. He wants to be done with, but he would have announced. So.
We mentioned at the top, big recruiting victory for Miami over the weekend and landing 4-star cornerback Jaboree Antoine, beating LSU, who had just beaten Miami midweek for DJ Picket, also beating Florida State for Jaboree Antoine's verbal pledge. So let's talk about the impact that he's going to have at the U. Brian Smith is with us, our recruiting overlord. We're only getting started on this brand new episode of Locked On Canes. You want to keep it locked. You already know I'm only getting started with FanDuel. Guys, we're winning money. We're having such a great time on the top sports book out there, guys. FanDuel, I know that, hey, the sports are not sportsing the way you want them to over the summer, but FanDuel lets me keep the sports going whenever I want. I had UFC bets over the weekend. I had bets on the Jake Paul fight. I had Jake Paul on the money line. All I have to do is open the app and dream up bets anytime I'm in the mood. And this summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus daily. That's right. There's something for everyone every day, all summer long. So head over to FanDuel.com and start making the most out of your summer. FanDuel, official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball. Thank you so much for making this remote episode of Locked On Canes your first listen and your first watch today. We're available free wherever you get your podcasts. We're free on YouTube. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And for the everydayers, if you want to take that everydayer experience to the next level, sign up for our exclusive SMS texting service called Locked On Canes Insiders. I include a link in the show description below. Become a Locked On Canes Insider. You get text messages directly from my phone to yours with breaking news, recruiting scoops, show updates, one-on-one questions and answers. Try it free for 14 days. Then if you like it, you can opt in for $4.99 a month. We give you a lot of added value on there on the Locked On Canes Insiders chat. Always added value when Brian Smith is with us. So, Brian, we had a couple of roller coasters this past week in recruiting. Let's talk about the one that Miami was victorious in on Saturday, landing Jaboree Antoine. Now, about a week ago, we were hearing about Florida State making a push. Apparently that fizzled out. And then after DJ Picket picked LSU, there was a lot of buzz that, hey, they got a hot set of dice. Corey Raymond, they're getting back in for Jaboree Antoine. Miami was able to weather that storm and get the verbal commitment on Saturday. Tell the people out there, Brian, what's Jaboree Antoine's game like in that defensive backfield? How good of a player is this?
I first saw him last summer at Future 50 at IMG, and he's a kid that stood out. I went out on my way to go talk to him for a few minutes. Great kid, really intellectual, and he plays that way too. He reads quarterbacks extremely well. He can play safety, can play corner, can play nickel. Long, athletic kid. He's what you're looking for physically, and he just makes plays. I don't know if there's 3 or 4 corners in the class that have better break on the ball skills than him and anticipation and combination. So I think he could play pretty early at Miami. I never like to say freshmen are going to start or anything like that, but he's a guy that'll be a multi-year starter at UM. This is a very, very talented player. LSU, Florida State, and Miami don't go hard after a corner just by accident.
Yeah, and you look at this defensive back class, Brian. I mean, I know, again, there's disappointment about the miss on DJ Pickett. Nothing's over till National Signing Day, of course. But, I mean, I see Hilton Drake Stubbs in this class now with Jaboree Antoine and Chris Ewald and Amari Wallace and Timothy Merritt. Like, this is somewhat quietly shaping up to be one of the better defensive backs classes I can remember in Miami recruiting history. And I don't think I'm overselling that.
It's ironic that you mentioned it because I was going back through some of Miami's classes over the last, say, 6-8 years. To be honest, Miami has missed far too often, especially South Florida kids, and they've went to the usual suspects, SEC schools, something like Michigan or Ohio State or whatever. They've missed on those kids. They're starting to get some of them, and then you add a kid like Antoine that's kind of helpful. Merritt from Birmingham, etc. They're starting to take from the SEC schools. And that's the way it was in the 80s and 90s. Miami, Ed Reed was from Louisiana. I'm sure LSU wanted Ed Reed. I'll go out on a limb. You know what I mean? Like that's part of the gig. So if you can get just one kid a year out of an Alabama, out of Louisiana, and you can supplement those by keeping your kids home, Ewald was a key player to get. Georgia wanted him. This just in. Georgia's really good at developing defensive backs. So I think Miami has turned their trajectory just to a whole nother level now. Maybe this can kind of be the expectation. They need to prove it on the field this fall because that's still their biggest concern. I remember doing a poll on the All Hurricanes X account, and that's the fans' biggest concern is pass defense. And it probably should be. But they've got some veterans back there this year, and if they can get this group in, maybe one transfer or something, they could be one of the better passing defenses in 25.
Yeah, guys, remember, by the way, that Brian, he's my colleague at allhurricanes.com. He does a fantastic job. So make sure you're checking it out, allhurricanes.com. Also, All Hurricanes on X. Brian, you cover recruiting for a living. What was it like covering that DJ Picket saga this past week? Because the week leading up to it was crazy because, Steve Wiltfong and some of the national guys kept saying, like, I think Oregon leads, but don't rule out Miami. He kept saying LSU seemed to be in third. And then a day before the announcement, everybody's dropping their crystal balls for Oregon, and he ends up choosing LSU. And it's funny, Brian, because when I did a couple shows afterwards, I had these LSU fans saying, like, what do you mean? It was obvious he was coming here to LSU. It's like, if you only read LSU recruiting sites, maybe, but if you go by the national guys, this one was all over the board. How surprised were you?
Not really. I know DJ well enough, going back to his 8th grade year. He doesn't tell anybody diddly. And I posted that the morning before the commitment on all Hurricanes. Like, look, I know there are all the rumors with Oregon, but anything is possible with DJ. I picked Miami because it was the local school. But I said, like, I have no local intel either. Neither does anybody else. And I mean, these people were putting out crystal balls just going by what some coach at Oregon or whatever told them. No, DJ's not going to tell anybody anything, and he's not going to forward either. That's just who he is. So Miami's going to continue to recruit him. I guarantee Oregon is too. But here's the biggest thing. This always comes back to this in recruiting. It's relationships. He's known Corey Raymond for a long time. I had actually spoken to Corey at a game last year, and we were just talking about different recruits in the 25 class, and he said DJ's probably the best kid in Florida next year. He made it a point, like, that's going to be a guy I go after. And then, of course, he ends up not being in Florida, goes to LSU, where you just continue to recruit him. That's a relationship that DJ really liked. I think that was the difference. It's just that nobody knew it because DJ doesn't talk to anybody. So Miami has its work cut out for it. They've got a new corner coach, but they also have a great DB class. If LSU goes out and lays an egg this fall in the secondary, and their secondary was so bad last year, and it was bad in the spring game, I have my reasons for concern. I'm curious to see if DJ still looks at that relationship as the bottom line, because who wants to play in a defense that's not good? LSU's got a lot to prove this fall.
Well, guys, by the way, we are 40 days away from Miami versus Florida in the Swamp. So I want to take Brian Smith's temperature on how he's feeling now with just over a month to go. And I also want to read some powerful quotes from a Miami Hurricanes player about how the team is, in his words, shedding their negativity. So, my friends, we're not done yet. You want to keep it locked right here on this brand new episode of Locked On Canes. We absolutely love this Locked On Podcast Network, and Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube, and now it's also available on Amazon Fire TV and the free Fire TV Channels app. It's called Locked On Sports Today, and it's here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. Find Locked On Sports Today, now available on the free Fire TV Channels app. We got the recruiting overlord, Brian Smith, is with us. He's sharing some intel there with Steve Wiltfong or somebody right this second. So Brian, first of all, 40 days now away from Miami at Florida at the Swamp. Miami, depending on which sports book you look at, I think on FanDuel, they're 3-point favorites right now against the Gators. How you feeling as we get a little bit closer to that game about Miami's chances to start the season 1-0?
I think it'll be a really good game, but I like Miami because they're better in the trenches. That doesn't really change. The old saying, defense and your run game travels. Damian Martinez is a nice compliment out of the portal. Obviously, the offensive line. Ironically, Jalen Rivers will be with Mario Cristobal on Wednesday, where you're at in Charlotte. Well deserved, by the way. Jalen's had a really good career at Miami. Very good football player. I'm curious to see this Florida defense that was awful last year in clutch situations, especially in the passing game, if they can at least mitigate Miami's run game, because if not, Miami has so much speed at receiver and quite honestly, a lot of experience. Elijah Arroyo is now healthy. They've got a big back that understands how to pass block. They're going to be in trouble if Ward goes up top, because we know his arm talent is phenomenal. I think it's a top 10 offensive line in college football, maybe even top 5. So I like Miami, and I think they'll cover, to be honest with you, because I just don't trust Florida's defense.
Yeah, no, well said. By the way, this is a really cool quote. Anez Cooper, Miami Hurricanes junior offensive lineman, and kudos to the guys at Cane Sport for having this conversation with Cooper. Cooper says it's a much different 2024 team than the ones fans watched during Cristobal's first 2 seasons. He says that a couple of guys, quote unquote, didn't want to be here last season. That's a negativity thing,
wow.
he said. Yeah, those guys those guys that don't want to be here and all that, we try to talk to them, tried last year. This is past tense. That can be a bad thing for a team because of the negativity, he told Kane Sport. Someone sees them down, they get down. It creates confusion between the team. Those guys should be out of the program, and they won't be here this year, he said. So he thinks that the negative guys are gone. In his words, he stressed that everyone has bought in this year. He expects fans will see the results when the season kicks off at Florida August 31st. Quote, our culture is where it needs to be right now, Cooper said. Everyone is bought in. We have fun with each other. And yeah, listen, I don't think it's a coincidence that Cooper said that, Brian. I've heard not quite as bluntly as the way he said it, but I've heard similar comments from players that I've interviewed in recent weeks who, talk about kind of the transformation of the locker room. Jalen Rivers being one of those who we spoke to on Locked On Canes about a month ago. I'm going to be speaking to him on Wednesday, and I'm sure, Brian, you've seen it covering teams at every level over the years. When you have a coaching transition like Miami had a couple of years ago, and you maybe have certain players who don't buy into that transition, maybe players with bad personalities who might have been recruited by the previous staff. And listen, even sometimes, sometimes the current staff may recruit players that you get some buyer's remorse with after a year or two. I think it's important that you move those players on somewhere else because you need to fix that locker room.
It usually takes a minimum 2 years. And I know fans don't want to hear that, to get rid of pieces that don't fit the new staff. There's no fixing the timeline there.
Yeah.
I'm not surprised that what Cooper said is true. I'm surprised that he admitted it. Good for him for having the guts to say, here it is, man. I have an idea on a few guys, by the way, but they had guys that wanted to ball out too. So it's important that he noted that the players were trying to accumulate, hey, group of us need to talk to this guy. Like, you can tell when you're in a sporting environment or even a family or business environment, if there's somebody that doesn't want to be there, their body language will give you hints. So I'm curious if they have fewer of those this year. You're never going to be 100% with 85-man roster, and that's fine. But it can't be like your quarterback. I wrote about that today on All Hurricanes. People will read Cam Ward's body language. Good situations, bad. He has to let things go. If he has a bad series, turns it over. That's just one example, but it goes down to the punter. If the punter shanks one, you can't have a moment that the coaching staff doesn't have confidence in. You have to go to the next play. It's hard. And that also relates to practice, weightlifting, going to class. Everything has to be on the up and up. So I'm glad that Cooper said they're together more. That's arguably the biggest question with the team.
Yeah.
Because how many times last year was Miami in a great shot to win a game and then they just shot themselves in the foot? It's very frustrating. That's been their biggest problem over the last 20 years. If they alleviate that, they should win 10 games. Their schedule's not very hard this year. It's not. The Louisville and Florida State games are the only ones that I think are similar talent. They're difficult, like, Virginia Tech, maybe Florida. You got to prove it to me. This is the easiest Miami schedule in a while and the most talented team. If they alleviate the self-inflicted wounds and they have good chemistry, this is a 10-win team.
Yeah, I agree. And I think, players like Anez Cooper, he's great for team chemistry. Cam Ward, to me, I mean, this guy came in, and ever since he arrived in January, he's been the ultimate teammate. He's had guys over to his place to watch games. He's had all these off-schedule workouts. Everyone seems to really like him. They seem to like how competitive Ward is, like all out of love, but he loves trash talking in practice, and it's the kind of stuff that actually brings the team together because it brings out the competitive nature. So we appreciate Brian Smith as always. Brian, thank you so much for the insight you dropped today. We'll be checking out your work throughout the week at allhurricanes.com. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. Appreciate it.
Excellent stuff as always by the Overlord. And folks, my journey this week is only getting started because ACC Media Days are getting underway today. We'll be talking with the commish. Miami players and Cristobal will be here on Wednesday, so we'll have a full week of coverage, and that's going to be going on Locked On ACC as well. So make sure you make Locked On ACC your second listen, because Kenton Gibbs and I will be covering ACC Media Days all week long. We'll talk to you next time on another episode of Locked On Canes, part of the awesome Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.